I want to thank everyone for coming, or I don't know how you say that in Zoom land, but in any case, um, I am thankful to the Florida Museum of Photographic Arts for inviting me to give this lecture about my exhibition of my father's photographs and letters of and with Langston Hughes. I wanted to start by kind of giving you a overview. um, the exhibition, which is called Griffith J. Davis, Langston Hughes, Letters and Photographs, 1947 to 1967, A Global Friendship, provides an insight into the life and work of two friends brought together by destiny. Their correspondence with each other over a span of 20 years serves as both the narrative and witness of their bond. It contains lessons about vulnerability in the face of adverse conditions, humor, and all the other elements of true friendships. This exhibition illustrates the beauty of two African American male friends supporting each other's dreams and aspirations in very difficult times through the evolution of their global friendship. Whereas Griff Davis does not have the level of widespread recognition as Langston Hughes does, his impact worldwide was substantially profound as a pioneer photographer, international freelance journalist, and Foreign Service officer. Through Griff Davis, through Griff Davis's growth from a student to a master photographer and the letters, the observer meets Langston Hughes as the simple character he created in his writing by showing the human being lurking within the icon status. This is an inspiring message that is very necessary in this day and age. I'm Dorothy Davis. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dorothy Davis. I am the daughter of Griff Davis and have been working on pulling his legacy together over 27 years now since he died. And this is the first exhibition that we are having under Griffith J. Davis Photographs and Archives. And we are glad that it's starting with the Langston Hughes collection. Whoop, okay. Excuse me. Technology and I are different. Okay. Here we go. So can you, oh.
And you're going to go to slideshow on the top right hand.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. All right. The exhibition opened on January 17th and was supposed to close on April 19th, but COVID interfered, so to speak. And so the museum had to close temporarily on March 16th. So we decided that this would be another way of getting you the opportunity to see. Griff Davis, my father, and Langston Hughes, their friendship began at the moment that my father stepped into Hughes's classroom as a student at Atlanta University in 1947. I have this here. I can send this to you because it's easier for you to see it that way. But in any case, this is the opening statement. Whoop. Okay, wait a minute. There we go. All right. This photograph is represents really the three characters in this exhibition. I call it characters, almost like a play, because in a way it's a human drama, so to speak. This is Langston Hughes and my father holding an ebony, which is important because it was Langston Hughes who brought ebony to my dad as an employee. This is the camera that he used a lot. And this is at Atlanta University in 1947. Langston Hughes had just the global context for this decided that since our history is not always complete, I stumbled on an article that Langston Hughes wrote in commemoration of Ebony's 20th anniversary, which was from November 1945 to 1965. And in it, Langston described the time frame really well. He says, in 1945, the year that Ebony was born, the world lay in shambles. Europe had been devastated by war. Hiroshima was in ruin. The atom bomb had been dropped. Most of Berlin was a mass of rubble. Hitler had committed suicide. Mussolini was hanged, and that year, Franklin Roosevelt died. But World War II had ended with the Japanese surrender in September. Then, at San Francisco, the triumphant powers gathered to create the United Nations. Among those present at its beginnings were Dr. Ralph Bunche, Walter White of the NAACP, Mary McLeod Bethune of the National Council of Negro Women, and Dr. W.B. Du Bois. Negroes were as interested in the world of tomorrow as anybody else. And that's the framework in which they met. My father had come back to Morehouse after serving in World War II in Italy as a Buffalo soldier, and he was a photographer there. So he was completing his studies at Morehouse when Langston Hughes arrived in January 1947 as a visiting professor his class was creative writing. So what I showed before was they had a presentation, that was their exhibition of Langston Hughes's work and as part of their celebration of his arrival. This is a reception they had for him. This man here is Dr. Rufus Clement, the president of Atlanta University at the time. These are students and faculty members, and you see how they're dressed, very clean, very sophisticated. They're drinking tea, it seems. There's no coffee, it seems. And so this is the beginning of his time at Atlanta University. The next set of photographs are of Langston with his students. This is Langston Hughes registering his students. This person here is my mother. That's Muriel Karin Davis. She did not register to attend Langston's class. My father saw her on the Spelman campus and said, "Hey, you want to meet Langston Hughes?" And that's how she got into that picture. But they became friends later on in life. This is Langston. This is a typical class in Langston's creative writing class. You see how everyone has ties on and hair slicked back and stockings and so forth. When I give tours at the museum, the young people are very surprised to see that kind of dress. This is my dad's first essay in the creative writing class, and it was edited by Langston Hughes, and he requested a copy afterwards. This is Arne Bontemps, the writer who was from Fisk University. He and Langston Hughes were very good friends, and they also wrote together. As you can see, Langston is smoking in the class, which is odd for these days. This is a professor at, this is a Spelmanite, actually. This is a Spelman professor. Her name is Juanita Toomer, and she's an English professor at Spelman College, shaking hands with Arne Bontemps and Langston Hughes after Mr. Bontemps had his lecture. And this is Dr. Rufus Clement, the president of Atlanta University. Langston Hughes liked to mingle with his students, so this is like a lunch hangout area where he would go and have lunch with his students. So this shows you how they gathered informally after class. This section is Langston and his student assistants. He continued to write as he, in addition to teaching. And so these are just vignettes, so to speak, of him and his student assistants. And here you see they're dancing, and I usually point out the fact that there's a record player, because this day and age they don't know what a record player is. So there's a record player and records, and he's being casual in his dress in this regard. This is in his faculty apartment at Atlanta University. Obviously he's having fun watching them dance. These student assistants are preparing for an academic convocation. I don't know any more detail than that. This student is taking instructions from him on different projects that he's working on that have nothing to do necessarily with the class, the classroom. Here is more of a group shot. I want to say that these photographs, my father is also the campus photographer for Spelman and Morehouse during this time frame. That's how he made extra money while he went to school. So some of these photographs may have been taken for campus newsletter or something of that nature. Here, Langston is being the bartender in his faculty apartment. Just a casual portrait. She's probably typing, his student assistant is probably typing one of his articles or something. And these are students working on other personal projects. Okay, this next set of photographs are of Langston the writer. So you see him writing everywhere. This particular photograph, you see him at work on his makeshift desk of the back seat of a chair, of the seat of a chair in his faculty room. This photograph accompanied this article entitled Chatting with Langston Hughes, which was written by a Morehouse College student, Linward Stevenson, and appeared in the Founders Day edition of the Morehouse newspaper, the student newspaper, the Maroon Tiger. This is in his faculty room. This is another angle of him writing, and you see his assistant doing what he's supposed to do. This is his work table. I believe he's working on an article for the Chicago Defender. And this is an iconic photograph that my father took. It appears on the cover of the 1947 pocketbook edition of Mr. Hughes's book, The Ways of White Folks. And more recently, in 2007, it appears on the cover of Dr. Jonathan Scott's book, Socialist Joy in the Writing of Langston Hughes. This was taken in his faculty room, faculty apartment, and is a very well-known photograph. Here you go. These are the books. Here is the person fixing or repairing his typewriter. You see how dignified and elegant this man is, and how he really believes in quality. And here he is smoking and writing another article. Then going further, Langston Hughes outside of Atlanta University, walking around, being around the Atlanta area. At this point, Atlanta was very segregated. I forgot to mention that. Atlanta was very segregated. Jim Crow was in full force. Blacks did not mix with whites in any level unless necessary. So there's the environment is very self-contained. So this person, I don't know who this person is. I'm hoping someone eventually will let me know who that is, but I didn't have that. These are, because it was segregated, blacks had their own businesses, and this is one of them. This was the Negro-owned Hopkins bookstore on Auburn Avenue in Northeast Atlanta, Georgia. On the left is Langston Hughes. This one in the middle is Jacob Henderson, one of the three owners, and Mr. Ellington, who was the store manager. This is 1947. I assume that Langston's books are in this bookstore. Here we have Langston autographing. Now I will say this and I will say this as the daughter. My father was 24 years old and a Morehouse man, and I don't doubt that he used his camera to attract women. So there we are. So I figured that he would tell Langston to stand there, please, and then he would tell, wouldn't you like a picture, like he did with my mom? So, I just have to say that. Okay, then we have, so to back up a little bit, my dad was born on Morehouse's campus and raised on Spelman's campus. My grandfather was the superintendent of buildings and grounds at Spelman, and was that until he died in 1939. Being part of the Atlanta, being in Atlanta, he went to, he interacted with Martin Luther King's family, and they attended Morehouse College at the same time. Now, and they remained friends until Martin Luther King was assassinated. In a memorial service that my dad, a sermon that he gave at a memorial service for Martin Luther King in Lagos, Ghana, in Lagos, Nigeria, he mentioned that the I Have a Dream speech that we all know Martin Luther King for actually stemmed from their days at Morehouse College and what they were taught. This man here, Mr. Borders, Reverend William Holmes Borders, is credited for being one of those professors that inspired the concept of every Black man having a dream. I have a particular perspective on that, in that while we recognize Martin Luther King Jr. as for the I Have a Dream speech, it was really what inspired the theory, the philosophy inspired African American men attending Morehouse to go after their own dreams. So they all went after their own dreams. It just so happened that Martin Luther King's was as big as it was. So this is the man that's credited for, and Dr. Benjamin Mays is credited for instilling that concept in the Morehouse men of that time. This man here is Charles Gideons, principal of public school. The name of the school is David T. Howard Jr. High School in Atlanta, Georgia, 1947. And these are students at that high school. There's Mr. Principal Gideons, and this is the teacher, Edith Wimbush. And they are obviously happy to be around him. He liked students, he liked youth. Here he's autographing for another set of youth This was during Negro Week, as Negro History Week in 1947. And this is another Atlanta public school with students. So I wanted to include that to show the breadth of him as a person. Okay, Langston Hughes, the speaker. This is Langston Hughes and Dr. Clement. These photographs are taken professionally, I'll put it that way. This is, in other words, my dad was getting paid to take these photographs. What happened when Langston Hughes found out that my dad was the campus photographer, he kind of latched onto him in that sense, because he would have him take photographs of him wherever he went. So he was not only like at the campus, he was not only the student, but he was also the photographer for Langston Hughes. And so this is one of those occasions. This woman is Dr. Virginia Jones, director of the Atlanta University School of Library Service. And she's giving welcoming remarks at the dinner meeting of the Public Librarians Conference held at Atlanta University's dormitories on May 23rd, 1947. This is Dr. Clement, the president of Atlanta University. And then, of course, Langston Hughes was going to be the speaker that day, the keynote speaker. Here he is speaking. She's bringing out a gift. And what you'll see here, these are librarians, and they're mostly, they seem like they're all women. So it shows that was the job of women, so to speak, is to be a librarian. Okay. This is the autograph and reception afterwards. Apparently, there were 97 Negro public librarians from 14 southern states that attended this conference, sponsored by the Atlanta University School of Library Service. Now, even though he was hired by Atlanta University, the historically Black colleges and universities in the area all work together, so to speak. So in this case, he's at a banquet for Morehouse College, because here is Dr. Benjamin Mays, the president of Morehouse College. And he was my dad's mentor. In fact, my brother is named after him. And then next to him is Martin Luther King Sr. I don't have any details about the occasion itself. And so now I thought I'd go into some of the letters. This is June 12th, 1947. So Langston Hughes realized that, well, he realized my dad needed a job after he graduated, and it so happened that he ran into John Johnson. Langston Hughes ran into John Johnson at a World's Fair, and Johnson mentioned to him that he was looking for a roving editor for Ebony. Now, Ebony was born, so to speak, in 1945, and since Langston Hughes had been working so closely with my dad, he recommended him. So here is a letter from Langston Hughes, June 12, 1947, to my dad at Atlanta University. And he said, Ebony is very much interested in your work, both your photography and your writing, and want to have a conference with you when you get here. Your Palmer spread is scheduled for their educational issue in the early fall. And then about 2 weeks later, roughly, he writes, on June 26th, he writes, Dear Griff, I'm delighted about the Ebony job, if you like the idea. So my dad got the job. It would seem an interesting start to me in your professional field. giving you a chance to write some too. Okay, so my dad became the first roving editor for Ebony, and I guess in that context, that's why in this letter, Langston Hughes asked him, does Ebony offer a contract? It might be a good idea to have one. Certainly be clear whether or not you can sell work elsewhere or if everything you photograph belongs to them. This is another excerpt from Langston Hughes's article commemorating the Ebony years. This is how he saw Ebony. There's been such a need in Negro lives to see themselves pictured beautifully, to view on the printed page something other than slums, and to learn that at least some Black men and women can be successful in this highly competitive world, that a magazine presenting nothing but the positive side would still be of value, even if the balance were a bit overboard. I do not feel that Ebony has gone overboard. This is the first article that my dad, that Ebony published. This is the Palmer article that Langston Hughes is referring to. This is a boarding school in North Carolina. It was one of the first Black boarding schools in the country. This is, my dad did the cover story on King Cole's honeymoon in Mexico. And then they did a combined story. Langston wrote it, my dad shot it, and another man named John Alston, who was more of a sociologist and a professor, I think, at Atlanta University, wrote this article about Atlanta. It was not well received by the Black community there. This is one of the photographs that was in that article. This is Langston Hughes with some visitors, writer Stetson Kennedy, author of Southern Exposure, and freelance photographer Marion Palfy in 1947. Ms. Palfy was a refugee from Europe and I think became a well-known civil rights photographer. This is another article, a separate article entitled Nursemaid to the Quadruplets. It appeared in Ebony. This is one of the photographs from that. This is June 1948. Now, what's happening now is my dad has been with Ebony for a year and a half now, and he's decided that he needs to hone his skills photographically and writing-wise, and just wanted to apply for he wanted to go to Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. So he consulted with Langston Hughes about whether that was a good idea and whether he would recommend him. So here in this letter, Langston Hughes is saying that he did fill out the application and he thought that that would be a good idea for him to do that. So ultimately, my father was accepted at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He was the only African American in his class. They only allowed one African American per year. And he was invited to rent a room out of Langston Hughes's home in Harlem. So he rented a room in Harlem in Langston's house. So to give a flavor of what's going on during this time in terms of popular culture, I'm gonna let you kind of glance through that. But basically, it's Langston Hughes capturing what was happening in America at that time.
Dorothy, why was that previous picture not received well?
Where are we? Who asked what?
Harriet is asking, but you pointed out that one of those pictures was not well received. Why wasn't it well received?
No, the article was not well received because it was pretty acerbic. It was about the Black community and the things that were said. They were not happy. The Black Atlantans were not happy with the things that were being revealed in that article, let's say it that way, to the point where my father, in one of his interviews, said that it was probably good that he wrote it from Chicago. I mean, everything turned out all right in the end, meaning that his friends still liked him in the end. but it was pretty critical. Langston Hughes did not take well to Jim Crow, as no one would at that point, but it also, he shone a light on how things were operating in Black Atlanta, put it that way. So I have the whole article. I can send that to you so you can see it, but it was pretty straightforward. So here's a rent check for $22.50 for rent in a room in Langston's home in Harlem at 20 East 127th Street. He lived there with his Aunt Toy and Emerson, and Dad was one of a few boarders. He lived, I think, on the top floor, and down the hall from where Langston Hughes was, and he also converted the bathroom into a dark room. So what happened here is, while going to school, going to Columbia Journalism School during the day, so to speak, he would also accompany Langston on some of his assignments at night. So he would use the bathroom / dark room to print his photographs, and he would show them to Langston. So this whole portion of this exhibition focuses on Langston at home. Here we have Grace Burley, who was a friend of Langston's, who gave him syrup, brought him syrup from Vermont. I don't have much more on her, but she was a very good friend. And this is Arabelle Thompson, the international editor for Ebony. I basically grew up with her, meaning she inspired me to become an international editor, but that didn't work out, because I was told by Columbia Journalism that I'd have to spend 20 years doing something else and then go to be an international editor. So anyway, here's my dad. He always said that you have to include yourself in the photograph. So here he did that. This is in Langston Hughes's living room. Here is his workroom / bedroom, going over his books. Here's his natural habitat, so to speak. We saw him in his office / faculty apartment in Atlanta. This is his place. This is his workspace. So here he is. This is Nate, who was his assistant, and this is him asleep. He would go, like I said, he would go out at night and on assignment, and then he would come back really late, and then it was known not to wake him up before 2 o'clock. So this is what Nate is doing, waking him up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And clearly he fell asleep with his papers on him. So this would have been the kind of night he would have had, so to speak. The next 5, I think it's about 5 photographs, are of my dad accompanying Langston Hughes on a story that Langston was doing called Backstage for Ebony, and where he was interviewing different entertainers to see what did they do backstage when they were waiting to go on stage. So this person here is, let me get this straight, he's interviewing Nellie Lutcher, R&B jazz singer and pianist, originally from Lake Charles, Louisiana. This is her. And they are backstage at the Apollo Theater. These other 2 people are unknown to me, but obviously that's Langston Hughes in the mirror with with his cigarette. Then this one is Canada Lee, and he's backstage on Broadway, where he was performing in the play Lost in the Stars. Canada Lee was a pioneer actor in role. He was a pioneer for African American actors. This photograph was included in the article that appeared in Ebony's March 1949 issue. This is an unidentified performer. I'm sure her name is available in that issue. I could not access that issue, but I thought it's important to include her. Here's another photograph of Nellie Lutcher. It looks like maybe they're reading, maybe she's reading something, or they're comparing notes. And this is a woman, this is a mystery woman. I say that because my dad left notes, captions, and in his caption, he says this is Edna Harris, and they are backstage at a Broadway presentation of A Streetcar Named Desire. But he put a question mark next to her name, and I looked her up, trying to see if that was right or wrong, and I couldn't get any clear answer. So I left the question mark in the exhibition in case somebody recognizes her. And then this is Dizzy Gillespie in his bathrobe. This is at the Apollo. This is at the Apollo Theater. It's somewhere between, it's probably in 1948 or so. And he's just I like the informality of the photograph. Okay, so now this is another excerpt from Langston Hughes's article. This one focuses on the international, the broadening of the international horizon of African Americans, in this case Negroes. This part is moving into their global friendship. The photographs you've seen so far are of Langston Hughes, the beginning of their friendship as student-teacher, the evolution from a student-teacher to a mentor in terms of his opening the door to him for Ebony magazine, and then turning into a friend where he was staying in his house and accompanying him on different assignments and just sharing life in that sense. So now my father has, while my father was at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, he attended a class with Kurt Safransky, who was one of the three founders of Black Star, which was an agency. They were three refugees that came over from Germany and brought the whole, what they call picture industry here, the whole photojournalism industry to the US. And it was Kurt Safransky who worked with Henry Luce in creating Life magazine. So he was teaching a class at New School in New York, and my dad took his class. And it is through that affiliation that my dad became an international freelance photojournalist for the Black Star. He was their only African American working internationally. So here he had his business card, and he used Langston Hughes's address. He went to Liberia, but he kept his mailing address as Langston's address. So Langston would pick up, would get his mail and write him and tell him, okay, you got mail from so-and-so. I'll hold it over here. That kind, I mean, that's the kind of relationship they had. Meanwhile, on my mother's side, my mother graduated from Spelman in 1950, and she became the first African-American female to work at Doubleday Publishers. So she's now moved from Atlanta to New York, and they've started dating. So, okay, so my dad now is going back and forth. He made 3 separate trips to Liberia between 1949 and 1952 as an independent international freelance photojournalist. And Langston sometimes included his work in his columns. So here, this is a Chicago Defender. No, this is a Chicago Defender article, and then right here he's talking about the promotional film that my father was doing, producing in Liberia. It was Liberia's first promotional film. As I said, he would use Langston's address and his home as his home away from home. So he received, here we go. Let's see. Oh, here we go. He received, this is another letter, February 23rd. Langston Hughes is writing my dad in Monrovia. My dad is in Monrovia, Liberia. And they're just this kind of gives you a sense of what's going on in the house in Harlem. And Langston Hughes is saying, we had a big party last Saturday night. Arna Bontemps was in town. House was full of neighbors, white folks, colored, musicians, singers, writers, and stray cats. And then he later on says, in the same letter, he says, I've begun work on the biography of ex-parole commissioner Samuel J. Battle, first Negro to become one of New York's finest, and am writing for page proofs of my new book, Simple Speaks His Mind, which will be hitting the bookstalls sometime in early April. Okay, so this is a photograph my dad took of Langston Hughes interviewing Mr. Battle. And the sad part about this is that even though Langston Hughes was working on his autobiography, eventually they never were able to publish it. No one would publish it. And ironically, I don't know, in 2000 or so, the then editor of the Daily News, Arthur Brown, contacted me because he wanted to use this photograph in his biography of Samuel Battle. So that photograph finally got published here. It was also published in Ebony at this time here, but it just shows how Langston Hughes, people don't necessarily think in this day how hard it was for him to get published. And luckily, Mr. Brown made note of that in his foreword. So he got some credit. I don't know if he used any of Langston's work, but at least he got credit for it. And then in the next letter is September 3rd, 1951. It is a letter from my dad in Monrovia to Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes attended and graduated from Lincoln University, and at the time, or around that time, so did Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Ezekwe, the first president of Nigeria. And so now what's happening is, as my dad is kind of going around in Liberia, well, Liberia, for one thing, was the epicenter. Liberia and Ethiopia were the epicenter of the godfathers, I'll call them the godfathers of the independence movement in Africa. And as a result, he would have access to people coming in and out of Liberia, talking to, trying to get the support of President Tubman of Liberia. So in this case, in the letter, he's saying, my dad is saying to Langston Hughes, Ezekwe is in the midst of an election. This is 1951. And he says, I sent in a detailed dispatch on the election to the Pittsburgh Courier and the New York Times. Don't know whether any of them printed it, but if they did, you can see the seemingly insurmountable ethnic and religious hurdles that Ezekwe is trying to hurdle, besides the British. So he's keeping them abreast, going backward, he's keeping them abreast of, one second, of what's happening. He's like a window to Africa for Langston Hughes and for John Johnson, because he's feeding information and leads to John Johnson and Ebony. After my dad arrived at Ebony, he brought in Robert Johnson and he brought in Lerone Bennett. They're Morehouse men, so it's part of the group. Okay, so in 1952, my dad proposed to my mom. And she was at Doubleday, as I said, and she immediately accepted. But he said, it's on one condition, that you have to come over to Liberia to get married, because I have to finish this film, which was Pepperbird Land, the promotional film of Liberia. And so she got on a plane, her first plane ride, Pan Am, to Monrovia, Liberia, with her wedding gown and everything. The wedding gown was designed by my uncle, her brother. Another uncle bought the silk from, I think it was Korea, because I think he was in Korea at the time. And then my grandmother sewed it. And so there we are. She arrives and she gets married. And so within a couple of days of that, he's still editing this film. So they ended up having a global honeymoon that he shot and wrote for Ebony. I assume at this point that he probably talked John Johnson into paying for it, at least expenses, because they went on into 4 different countries. They started in Kakata, Liberia, and went on. And so they informed Langston Hughes that they were married, or they'd gotten married. And so he wrote them and said, okay, you need to stay married, because I want to know everything about being married, because my next Simple book is Simple Takes a Wife. And so Simple Takes a Wife is based on whatever information he got from my parents about being married. Okay, so now we're in another letter. This one, this is a visit of Kwame Nkrumah, who is not, Ghana is not independent yet. It is still called the Gold Coast. And this letter is basically, my mother wrote it, my dad signed it, to Langston Hughes, telling him that we guess by now you've heard of Nkrumah coming to Liberia and spending 11 days here. Griff, along with a few others, went to get him down in the Gold Coast on Tubman's yacht. Griff was busy covering him by taking pictures. Also, we gave a cocktail party for members of the Gold Coast press and Liberian press, plus Nkrumah, President Tubman, the American ambassador, and TCA director. Nkrumah wishes to be remembered to you. He was wondering if you were still writing. We told him yes. He said he would like to see you. So, so this didn't come out right, but in any case, this was the official photograph taken by my dad at the request of Tubman. This is the president of Liberia at the time, and Kwame Nkrumah. And this is a booklet of all the photographs he took connected to that that visit. And this is now 4 years before Ghana became independent. And this is when Ghana became independent. And my dad, as a Foreign Service officer, was taking this picture. This is the first meeting of Vice President Richard Nixon and Martin Luther King and their respective wives, Coretta Scott King and Pat Nixon, in Ghana at the time of the independence celebration of Ghana. These two had just finished the Montgomery bus boycott, rather, the Montgomery bus boycott, and what is of additional significance in this picture is that Nixon is inviting King to come to see him in DC. So we were able to show that during the exhibition since it opened Martin Luther King weekend. And then on May 30th, 1953, there's a letter between Langston Hughes and my parents saying H. Man Bond, who was the president of Lincoln University at the time, came back from the Gold Coast with proposition from Nkrumah to do his biography. I declined, but proposed Arna Bontemps. And then here there's a mention of me because now my parents have told him that they're expecting. And so I love this. So he says, will the heir apparent be born there or here? so that's nice. In this letter, Langston Hughes is asking for help to find African writers. He's putting together an anthology of African short stories, and he's combing the place. So he's asking for help. That's why we have SOS. And then he also mentions that he's received 2 letters from Ezekwe, who's becoming the president, who's headed this way next week, meaning he's headed to New York. So I'll see him either here or at Lincoln's centennial commencement, where he is to speak. He says, Nkrumah wrote me a nice letter too not long ago, and Haile Selassie, from whom I never hear, is in town and will attend Abyssinian Baptist Church tomorrow. So they're all connected, even though they don't see each other. So this is what happened. This was the article, the 5th anniversary cover article that my dad did about Haile Selassie, which was before Langston Hughes was writing that other letter. And then also this is the book that resulted from his looking for short stories, African writers. Okay, and here, this says a little bit more about what's going on in Langston Hughes's life. This is January 31st, 1959. Hey, old boy, Griffith J. And he says, one of the things he says here is, Cartier-Bresson is coming up to see us tonight. He did the photo for my forthcoming selected poems due out in March. And your photo of Arna and I on the Book of Negro Folklore looks fine. So this was the cover photo that was on a number of their books, actually. This is Arna Bontemps, and this is Langston Hughes, as you can tell. You already heard about them from their relationship. This was an important book because it was the first time a book had been published of letters from 2 African American writers. I kind of borrowed the name of the exhibition from this. It was an inspiration. So I just, giving credit where credit is due. So the last letter in this exhibition is, I thought was interesting because it shows the breadth of the globalness of Langston Hughes's impact. In this letter, it's September 18th, 1962. This is like 5 years before he died. He's writing to say, I guess you know I was in Africa this summer, Uganda for a writers' conference, then Nigeria and Ghana for the USIS. On the way home, I stopped in Rome where my Shakespeare in Harlem was being done by a group of Negro actors left over from Cleopatra, and saw my Black Nativity at Spoleto. It is now a big hit in London. So that's okay. So you saw the portrait. This is, I thought I would add 4 photographs that Dad took of Harlem, or of his time in New York. This one is probably the oddest one. I don't know how he took this photograph, but it's all the only caption I have from him is that someone named S.M. Houston of 401 Edgecombe in New York City delights bathers by floating with cigar, cap, and newspaper circa 1948 to 1952. I just thought you would enjoy seeing the flavor of the time, so to speak. These are Harlem boys looking at a storefront of a jewelry store in Harlem, in Harlem. That, you can see that any day, really. And then this one, oh, I'm missing one. Oh, excuse me. Okay, something happened to the other one. Anyway, this one is the last photo. I find this to be very striking. Both men are essentially wearing similar clothing. The look on the white man's face is one of surprise, I think, that the elegance is reflected in the Black man with the top hats. I just think it's a very elegant picture. So I call it Elegant Top Hats Crossing Paths in Harlem. And this is between 48 and 52. And that's another photo. And that's it. So there's a catalog that's available and has the same cover, so you're not seeing double. And this is available also. And
excellent.
This is also available.
That's really excellent, Dorothy.
Thank you. I don't know who said that, but thank you.
Harriet said that.
Oh, okay, okay. And I wanted to thank the Florida Museum of Photographic Arts and the Tampa Bay Businesses for Culture and Arts and My Favorite Art Place for being co-sponsors of this exhibition. Without them, this definitely would not have happened. And the photographs I received came from different places, including our own collection. The Atlanta University photographs, Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, and David Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library in Duke University. Beinecke also helped in terms of helping me locate the letters. And the Langston Hughes Society and Donna Akiba Sullivan Harper of Spelman College. Oh,
beautiful.
Yeah, I must say this. This exhibition is part of the 75th anniversary celebration of the American Society of Media Photographers. And they were media partners along with the Tampa Bay Association of Black Journalists.
What position were you in to do that?
These are all the different categories of subjects in the entire collection of 55,000 images, and each one has its own story. That's it. Any questions?
Open it up.
First of all, congratulations, Dorothy. It's an excellent presentation. I've learned so much with your lecture, although I have seen a few of those photos in the past at your place. A fascinating history. This is major.
Thank you.
Where are you going after this exhibit?
Well, at the moment, the exhibition is in the museum. And so I think it's going to stay for a little bit while, if it's not because of COVID or something. We don't know what's happening with that. We'll just say it that way.
Yeah,
but
I was.
I am hoping that
I know it's going to come. It's not right now.
What?
It will come, even if not right now, because of circumstances in the world.
Right. Okay. So I'll put it that way. Due to circumstances, it remains at the Florida Museum of Photographic Arts, which is a nice place for it to be. And when they want to move it along, then I will move it to someplace else. And I'm open to other suggestions. I would like to bring it to Atlanta because there's so much Atlanta history in it, and I would like to bring it to New York because of that. But it's a general story. I really wanted to showcase a broad relationship between them and the different kind of skills that they had and experiences that they had that don't always get shared.
Their friendship was really special.
Yeah.
This is Cheryl Finley. I just wanted to say congratulations to you, Dorothy. It's a great, great presentation. I can't wait to see the exhibition, and also it would be wonderful to have it at the Atlanta University Center.
Yeah,
so
they're interested
really
in
strong.
it. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah,
yeah,
I can
Hi,
imagine.
Cheryl.
Hi.
Cheryl has been with me throughout this journey of pulling this together, pulling the larger collection together. So,
Dr.
me.
Willis brought us together for sure, and
Yes.
I know she's here with you too. But it's really great to see what you've done with it, and to hear the words and the letters, and use them to look through and at the photographs.
Yeah, Deb introduced me to the word of ephemeral. I never heard that word before she mentioned it to me, and then she just guided me along the way as I traipsed through the process. But I'm glad it's here, and I feel like it's a history that is not told, not only for African Americans but for Americans and the globe.
Yeah,
it's also very inspiring.
Yeah, it was really a great talk, and I learned a lot, even though I met your dad and he told me many stories. But just to hear you remember some of the stories, especially the travel, he told me about his wedding, and this means a lot. Unfortunately, I have another defense, so I'm going to have to take off.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm so honored. Thank you.
Well, it was fun spending the day with you, and I up to camp. I was glad to be able to go up and see it before the COVID came.
Yeah, COVID. Well, COVID just allowed us to do it in a different way, and say it that way. Look for silver lining.
Nicely put. Nice.
Dorothy, is there any opportunity for this presentation to be done again in a way that we can invite a larger audience?
Yeah, just yeah. The answer is yes. Any suggestions? We have exhibition. We'll travel. Have all of this is available. Let's put it that way. And
right? This is recorded, so it can be viewed by people.
Yeah.
It's all going to be recorded and sent out and displayed, and then you can do what you want to do with the Dorothy as well. Yeah, I just wanted to get so many participants in, and we're all learning this very on the fly.
Yeah.
Will the recording be sent to the participants in the Zoom, or how can we gain access to it?
It's being recorded, so once I have the link, I'll probably put it on either YouTube or something like that, and then I'll share it with everybody, and then you can re-see it and replay it.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. One of the, when they were hanging or installing the exhibition, the people who were installing it said, you know, if you go to another museum, if you're going to make this a traveling exhibition, then you need to tell them that the education department needs to be involved, because there's a whole lot of history here, and that we don't hear. And even when I have given tours, people are amazed at the things that both they see in terms of the photographs, but also in terms of the content and the context. And so that's been fun, to listen to people's reactions and to be able to share.
Well, I remember you said that one picture with Nixon and Martin Luther King, that picture couldn't have been shown in the United States at the time. So
right.
Cool. They were able to get together over there.
But now it's an important piece of history.
Yeah. Yeah, it was banned, and luckily the Tampa Bay Times broadcast it or whatever, shared it with everyone. So now it's out and about, and the story is there. But yeah, you know, I mean, it was Africa, so you know, there was no internet, there was no none of the capabilities that we have now, and so stories got buried there, so to speak. And luckily he was someone who felt the importance of documenting in all kinds of ways. So I have it in written form, I have it in photography, in different forms of photography, you know, like slides, and I have prints, and I have contact sheets, you know, I have negatives. So I have the whole gamut, and part of putting this out is to get people to recognize the breadth of the work, and to also get support for it, because it's been a labor of love.
Wow. It's amazing. Well, the letters are so special that you can see where they've been edited and worked on and crossed out, and to have those original manuscripts is really exciting.
And the wider community will welcome it to learn about a period they know nothing about. Yeah.
Some people have suggested that it turn into like a curriculum of some sort for the schools. I mean, I'm open to that. I am not the one to do that, but I am open to that.
Yeah, in schools, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know if any other questions or.
Yes, from the family.
Yes, family.
Your cousins are on. You were great.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Which cousins? It's okay. I'll hear later.
You'll hear later. Great job, Dorothy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dorothy, if you unshare your screen, maybe you can get the full gallery, and then you can see everybody.
Thank you. Very good. That's very good. Okay.
Oh, there you are.
Dorothy,
okay, I'll catch up.
Have you put the verbal presentation you just gave us into written form in terms of a contract proposal?
Not yet.
Well, I think you might think about that, and perhaps there might be some leads for some publishing companies that would find it very useful as well as profitable for them to consider doing the book for you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Thank you.
And maybe in some abbreviated form or as a preview, the Langston Hughes review, which is now back in print.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, hey, David.
That would be a good place to start, the Langston
Yeah.
Hughes review.
Yeah, Langston Hughes review is back up. Anthony, okay, I forgot anything. Well, we have an editor and he's doing great things. We've had several issues. So if anybody wants to be a member, langstonhughessociety.org.
Yes, the Langston Hughes Society has been very helpful. And Donna in particular. Donna.
Have you been
Donna
able
had,
to connect with some of the other people who during that time or in his classes? Have you,
I have been in touch with Spellman because Dad was a campus photographer, so they have some of his work as a student photographer, as a campus photographer, because he was getting paid too. I haven't gotten over to, well, now it's Clark Atlanta, but the AU Center, the Atlanta University Center, I've gone to them and asked for them to go through their files. I've been in touch with them for a couple of years now, and they came up with those photographs. I think there are actually more somewhere else, because he was there doing that. He lived on campus, when I say campus, he lived on Spellman's campus until he was 16 years old. And what used to be the guest house was where he lived. It was demolished and it became the Camille Cosby building. He was very upset about that. He even went and got a brick. He went to the site and got a brick. And he came home and I said, "What are you doing with a brick?" And he said, "This is a brick for my house." I'm like, "Okay, whatever." It's like, okay. But I understood later on in life why that was so important. But at the time, it seemed a little odd. But it's okay,
Oh, that's a wonderful story, Dorothy.
Yeah.
Do you still have the brick?
No.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't know one brick from the other. So, he wasn't one to tell me a whole lot, at the time. It was more like snippets, okay? And I'm sure if he was alive today, he'd say, "How'd you pull all this together?" Well, you had it in snippets, and I finally put it together, because he wasn't really, he didn't
He'd be
share a
very
whole
proud
lot.
of you, Dorothy. He'd be very
Thanks.
proud of you putting this together.
Thanks. I think he would be very shocked that I'm doing this, because Faraha is on here. Faraha was the person who framed. She did all his framing in Atlanta. Okay, and that's how I met her, because he would take me to her when he would go to frame something, and so that's how I met her. And then she migrated to New York, and we kept in touch, and so we're still friends. But I was talking to her last night, and I told her that this exhibition is actually reminds me of his last exhibition, which was at in Atlanta, Auburn Avenue Center. I always get the names mixed up, but it was Auburn Avenue. That much I know. And some friends of his from Atlanta, because he's Atlantan, decided they were going to have this, the family room wall.
Okay.
And I said, "Oh, that's nice. Dad is starting a hobby. That's good. I'm glad he's got a little hobby now that he's retired." I didn't know anything, but that's what tells you.
Work.
This is like, he's like, I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then that's kind of how I went with it. So then they have this exhibition, and I see even more photographs that were not hung on the wall. And I'm like, "Well, that's nice. So nice of his friends to do this." And then his friend comes, the woman who the curator of the thing comes to me and says, "You will take care of his photographs." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, I'm gonna have to take care of everything anyway." But I thought, a year, I'll go through everything. And then I started. After he died, I started, and it's like, oh my God. And then what was happening was because I had to clear out the house. It took me 2 years to clear the house out. And he had some things in order. There were files, And so luckily I was able to discover a piece of a letter or something, like, a letter from Nkrumah, and you're like, a letter
Oh,
from
wow.
Nkrumah.
What a discovery.
Okay, all right. And then I would have to sit down and digest that. Okay. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to go to the next thing. And that's how I would go. But reading the letters helped me figure out the pieces, right? And then I would discover
Right.
the photographs and go, oh, that's that history. And then because I lived with him overseas, I mean, I grew up with him, so to speak, I knew certain nuances and certain things connected. And in one time he asked, somebody asked him, of your 2 children, who is the most like you? And he said, my daughter. But that I went into communications. I'm the one in development work. So I understand that, right? So so I just started. I didn't know it was going to take me this long. I didn't know the path was going to be as circuitous as it has been and continues to be.
Well, it's remarkable that you stayed with it and didn't just at some point go, oh my gosh.
Well, the thing is, I realized that nobody has this history. I mean, I have never heard this history from anybody else, and so and he was meticulous about it, and he was on the front lines in many situations. And I even have history that the countries don't have, right? I have history of Liberia. I have 7,000 images of Liberia from 1949 to 57. And then I have photographs of Tunisia right after independence. And then the documentation that goes with that, like because he's a foreign service officer, so he's doing reports and things like that. So, I mean, it's like a treasure trove. So I feel like, if I don't pull this together, it's going to get lost. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is put it in a place. I really would like to be in some kind of an academic situation where that's all I'm focused on. So I can teach, and I can pull this together, and I can have what do you call them? Not interns. What do you call them? You know what they are, Donna. I don't know. I forget what they call them, but
Research assistants.
there you go.
Research assistants.
Research assistants. Just to get it in order, because I know it's going to take a long time, but it's very important to leave it a certain way. That's all.
You will. I have total confidence in you, woman. You'll find a way. You will.
Yeah, we'll see. So.
Yeah, she will. She finds a way out of no way.
Right? We will.
That's for
we
Anna.
know.
That's true. That's very true. Very true.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for sharing with us. Wonderful, wonderful to see it firsthand and your explanation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Good to see you again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay.
No worries. Thank you so
That's
much
great.
for everyone coming. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you.